Today, we're diving into the story of a commander who fought an entire empire to a standstill. And he didn't do it with giant armies and epic battles. He did it with shadows and whispers. This is the incredible story of Hugh Dubh O'Neill, Ireland's ghost warrior.
So let's set the scene. It's 1649. Oliver Cromwell lands in Ireland, and he's not alone. He's brought his new model army, and this thing was a true military machine. It had crushed kings, it was seen as the most disciplined, ruthless, and just flat-out effective fighting force in Europe. And their mission? The swift, total conquest of Ireland. And man, at first, it was a terrifying success. The invasion was absolutely brutal and shockingly efficient. Major cities like Drogheda and Wexford just fell apart. Irish armies were shattered in open battle. It honestly looked like the whole thing was going to be over in a matter of months. But then, something weird started happening. Reports from Cromwell's officers began to change. They started talking about this problem up in Ulster, the northern province. It wasn't a great army they were facing. It was something else. Something persistent, frustrating, and totally invisible. A shadow was waiting.
So you have to ask, what made Ulster so different? Well, it wasn't about the army O'Neill had. It was about the landscape he commanded. This was a whole new kind of war, and believe me, the new model army was not ready for it.
Now, you gotta understand, O'Neill wasn't fighting from some position of strength. The old Gaelic world was broken. The powerful lords were in exile, English plantations had sliced up the land, and the great stone castles, they were just ruins. He was literally leading a resistance from the ashes. And the contrast between the two sides, it's night and day. On one side, you've got the new model army, organized, heavily armed with cannons, built for big, set-piece battles. And on the other side, Hugh Dubh's force, small, fast-moving bands who traded artillery for a deep, intimate knowledge of the bogs, the forests, and the glens. It was pure brute force versus local genius. But here's the kicker. O'Neill wasn't just fighting differently out of desperation. He was basically writing a new blueprint for warfare, one that military thinkers wouldn't even formalize for centuries. And nothing captures how frustrated the English were better than their own words. One officer described him as a man who could not be caught, surrounded, or forced into battle. They called him that bandit O'Neill, not out of respect, but because he was this phantom they just couldn't pin down. So how did he do it? What was the secret sauce? Well, his whole strategy can be boiled down to 4 honestly brilliant principles. Number 1, he knew an army starves without supplies. So forget the army, attack the supply convoys. 2, never ever fight a pitched battle where their numbers and discipline would crush you. 3, perfect the hit and run, strike hard, and then just melt back into the landscape. And finally, number 4, make the daily life of an occupying soldier an absolute nightmare. And this wasn't just theory, right? Here's what that actually looked like on the ground. His men would ambush supply lines, leaving Cromwell's soldiers hungry, cold, and out of ammo. They'd hit small, isolated garrisons in the dead of night. And this is key. He used the brutal Irish winter as a weapon against English troops who just weren't ready for it. He stayed off the roads, and his intelligence network, made up of local civilians, meant he always knew exactly where the enemy was, and more importantly, where they were weak. All of this forces us to ask a totally different question. If O'Neill wasn't winning battles in the way we usually think about them, what was he even doing? Well, it means we have to completely redefine the idea of victory. Look, if you scam the history books for a great, glorious victory with Hugh Dubh's name attached, you're not going to find it. He never lined his army up on a big field and defeated the new model army head-on. By that standard, you could say he was a failure. But think about this for a second. Cromwell, the legendary commander, came to Ireland, waged his bloody campaign, and then he left. And who was still there, still fighting, still making Ulster ungovernable? Hugh Dubh O'Neill. He didn't defeat the army, he outlasted its commander. He won by simply not losing. And his legacy? It's profound. The template he created, using the landscape, relying on locals, hitting the supply lines, it became a core part of Irish resistance for centuries to come. The Rapparees who fought later on, the United Irishmen in 1798, you can see the DNA of Hugh Dubh's tactics in all these later guerrilla campaigns. So, this brings us to the final, really haunting question. If this guy was so effective, so influential, why isn't he a household name? Why did history's ghost warrior almost vanish completely from the record?
It's a real puzzle, isn't it? A man who holds off Europe's best army, who creates a blueprint for resistance that lasts for centuries, and yet most of us have never even heard of him. What happened?
Well, the answer is in the very nature of his war. See, history remembers things you can see. Big monuments, grand castles. O'Neill didn't leave any of that. His fortress was the land itself. There are no portraits of him. He never had a glorious moment of surrender or some big treaty signing. His story of stubborn, messy, unending resistance just didn't fit the clean, simple narrative of conquest that imperial histories like to tell. And maybe that's the most fitting way to remember him. Because while the historians might have overlooked him, you can bet the soldiers on the ground knew exactly who he was. They lived in constant fear of him. To them, he wasn't just some rebel leader. He was a phantom in the mist, a ghost that haunted every single valley and every dark road in Ulster. And that leaves us with this final, powerful thought. The story of Hugh Dubh O'Neill teaches us that victory doesn't always look like a parade. When you're facing overwhelming force against an empire at its absolute peak, he proved that to endure, to resist, and to deny your enemy that clean win, well, sometimes survival itself is the greatest victory of all.